Claire. So we'll just start it off by reading from the introduction of the book, The Properties of Perpetual Light. The writers I love most are almost always on a mission to save the world one sentence at a time, to redeem us and to rescue back our righteous minds. These writers risk not only the criticism of their peers, as earnestness is said to ruin art, but also the possibility that their words will be mangled and misunderstood. Still, they offer up their gifts, hoping, as the brilliant Black feminist Audre Lorde had hoped, that their words can close some of the gap between blindness and our better selves. In other words, these writers do language, but they also do battle. And the battle is on. Whether we like it or not, whether we choose to deny it or not, climate change has put us on an unforgiving timeline. If the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees is to be believed, we have about 10 years left to get our collective shit together, curb our emissions, and ensure the future habitability of the Earth. Ensure there is a future. And the questions fall to the soul like dew to the pasture. Where do we go from here? What do we do with our desolation? How obscene is it that communities with the smallest carbon footprint, like low-lying islands and atolls in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, are paying the steepest price for a crisis we had almost no hand in creating? How do warm-blooded longings for equity and justice figure into global discourse dominated by the cold language of mitigation and adaptation? How do we stay sane as well as sentient? As the luminous author-activist Naomi Klein puts it, how do we stay human in a warming world? This book, sadly, does not answer any of these questions, not directly anyway. This collection instead attempts to trace the arc of the morally strenuous spirit that drives so many writers to take pen to paper. It is an homage of sorts to the work of the activist writer, which is the work of bearing witness, wrestling with the questions of one's day, telling children the truth. This book collates a wide range of writing penned for various audiences to mark a variety of occasions, from graduations and protests to birthdays and funerals, even an impending nuclear threat. Some of these pieces were not originally intended to be shared, but rather were adapted from old notes and journal entries, written at particularly memorable moments in my life. What connects all of them is not their subject matter, but their spirit, which more than anything else is a spirit of insistence. All of them, in their own way, insist on life, no matter the hour, even at the hour of death. There is a Catholic prayer for the dead that children in Guam learn early on, our parents having dragged us to more rosaries than we can remember. While the prayer is beloved by Catholics everywhere, here we cradle it closer than most, if only because there is just so much death. When a loved one dies, we descend upon a family member's home or the village church to pray for 9 nights. In unison, we say, "Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. May they rest in peace." I have recited these words thousands of times, yet it is only now, in compiling this manuscript, that I have truly reflected on their meaning. In one of the entries included here, a commencement speech I gave to the graduating class of my former high school, I talk about how reading Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist recalibrated my thinking about what it means to be a self-actualized adult and what it takes to become one. In this speech, I tell the graduates that the only way to successfully make the journey from adolescence to adulthood is to learn how to get quiet. That is, to quiet down the noise of other people's opinions and to take instruction instead from one's own heart. I tell them of a beautiful exchange between the alchemist and the boy after days of traveling the desert, where the alchemist explains that those who are interested only in gold do not understand the secret of alchemy. For lead, copper, and iron all have their own destinies to fulfill, and anyone who interferes with another's destiny will never discover her own. This exchange has stayed with me, like a pressing on the chest. I think I finally know why. In our spiritual lives, as much as our material ones, the same insight applies. In the same way that the earth metals have different properties, so too do their spiritual counterparts, like hope and faith. What is hope, for instance, if not a stubborn chink of light in the dark? What is faith, if not setting out in that same darkness with only our belief in the light to guide us? And what of perpetual light? What are its properties? We know from the Bible that the only thing to ever precede light is love. I think that's it. Perpetual light is the ancient beauty. When we recite the prayer for the dead, we are asking God for our loved ones' safe passage, and we are offering up the only thing we have, our love, to light their way. This book is a little like that, like a love letter to young people. It seeks to call them forth, to do language and to do battle, to write as if everything they love is on the line, because it is.
Beautiful, Julian. Thank you for reading that. Yeah, the book's opening is really incredible, and it just, perpetually is beautiful throughout, and I'm just so impressed with this book. Can you talk about putting this book together? Because I want to hear about your work, that you have been doing, but you sort of forced into a break and were given the opportunity to spend time on a book because of COVID and isolation. And can you talk about the seed of the book, like when you thought of it, and then what it was like putting it together during such a time as this?
Sure. So I've said before that, I didn't sort of board the bus with any destination in mind, I just sort of started writing because I couldn't not write. That's like the plainest way to say it. I just felt like I had, I couldn't breathe, so I had to write. That's what was happening in the context of the COVID crisis here in Guam. And long story short, the pandemic really laid bare all of the long-standing structural disparities and inequalities. It really entrenched them for all to see. Guam is still a colony of the United States, and we're very heavily militarized as well. So the entire time the pandemic is proceeding, there's also a large-scale military buildup happening that me and a bunch of others in the community, especially the indigenous activist community, have been opposing really vociferously, and we've been opposing it, but sort of the war drums keep beating, it kept going the entire pandemic. None of it stopped, like destruction of limestone forests and the construction of these live fire training ranges, all of it kept happening, And on the other hand, the USS Theodore Roosevelt came to Guam, and docked here, and the governor permitted that. And what ended up happening was that, so many naval soldiers who were infected or who tested positive or negative and then later positive, they were actually housed in a bunch of our local civilian hotels, and they violated all of our lockdown orders. They violated all of our executive orders, and they went around to restaurants and bars, and they were, it was too much, It was like every kind of war game was afoot at once. And I think I couldn't breathe in that way. And so I needed a home for all of the rage that I felt, and then it became clear to me, a home for all of the love. And so that's what I started doing. I started writing, and I guess you could say halfway through, it became more clear to me what I was doing. I was writing a book that was primarily interested in announcing the presence of the beautiful. I don't know how else to say it. We need to be reminded just how, how beautiful this place is. And so I started writing these vignettes, like old school San Francisco style vignettes, like from like, I was thinking even House of Mango Street a few times. When I had so many different authors, just sort of whispering in my ear at different points when I was writing different entries. But yeah, I realized, when you take on stuff like this, and as an activist and as an activist lawyer, you take these things on, and a lot of times it's so adversarial, right? The nature, of the work that we do when we're like opposing something. And I was like, this is not enough. Like, it's not enough. We need to articulate what we're fighting for. I mean, just like young Indigenous activists they're not against Line 3 only. We're not against the Dakota Access Pipeline. We're for a worldview that is rooted in mutual respect for the earth and for each other. If we don't do that, and I was like, maybe this book is my like small attempt to try to articulate another, way of being, and so the book was born.
That's great. I would love to hear, because I didn't sense the rage in the book or the anger. And when my book came out, there was a lot of like people talking about how palpably angry it was, or like how much rage they could feel. And I certainly have that, and I wasn't surprised to hear it. And I know I know that it's there based on the stuff that you say, but there is so much love and beauty and light in the book. And I wonder if this is, I wonder like on a craft level, or in a revision sense, what do you do to mitigate the rage and transform it into what, this book?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, because I feel the same way too. In the end result, right? Its love was much more sort of palpable, than any of the sort of indignation that it had, and it's rooted in all of those things. But I think in some ways, maybe the book is an attempt to be an antidote to that. This is just about, and I feel like in some ways it's happening all over this country. I mean, not just this island, but this country and all over the world, where so many of us were just locked in this sort of adversarial sort of way of conversing, that we've almost like, we don't have the vocabulary anymore. So to talk to each other or to meet each other where we're actually at. We just talk at each other. And I was like, this book, if it's capable of, I don't know, like as I say, in the intro, of winning back our righteous minds, it has to be doing something different. So it has to be quieter, and the writing has to be gentler. And I kept coming back, honestly, to the butterfly. I did. And it's a butterfly that I care so deeply about at this point. It's funny, in my life and this butterfly's life is, we're like, flying around each other. We're circling each other, at a dance of life. We're trying to affirm life. And so like recently we filed just this week a lawsuit to protect the critical habitat of the Mariana eight-spot butterfly. But I kept thinking about that. And I don't know, Tommy, if you remember that passage from Zugu Means Yoke, when I talk about losing my father and I'm up in the mountain and with the animals. And I was like, wow, I'm writing about an experience of learning empathy from insects. I was like, I like really sort of like those, like the first creatures I identified with in some ways, when I was so spectacularly vulnerable in my own life, seeing tree snails and seeing, myself in them, just that, wondering if this slow moving family of tree snails could ever move swiftly enough to save their own lives. Actually being a child asking a question like that. And that was like, those were the questions that, sort of like colored my entire childhood. Like, and I return to those questions, which are quiet questions, and the answers to those questions are quiet as well. And so I think that's what it was. And I think that's the one thing about COVID and the pandemic and having all of that space and all of that distance from the noise of other people, even the noise of yourself when you're, sort of like lying to yourself when you're too busy in the, the busyness of daily life, like doing the dishes and running to work, all of that, when that's all quiet, you just get, I don't know, I just remembered or recalled all of those feelings, and I tried to really capture them, and I tried to also not revise them so much, and so that I kind of impose an adult like seriousness on some of the pieces. I just really wanted to preserve the child's voice. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I was completely won over in that chapter when you explained that it was Halloween and you were dressed up as Donatello, which is not the turtle that most kids necessarily chose. I love that. And the fact that this thing is a love letter to young people, and you just saying what you said about adults. And can you talk about why you thought this was for young people, and how that relates to, in some ways, the antidote needs to be delivered to the old white evil men who are making so many decisions that are destroying destroying the future of young people and young people of color in a disproportionate way. But you decided that this was for young people, and I would love to hear your thinking around that.
Yeah, there's another local writer, a good friend of mine named Siobhan, and she told me, we had this conversation about writing beyond the colonial gaze, because oftentimes it's a black and white paradigm, and oftentimes, and it's extended to other contexts, but this idea of writing beyond the white gaze, I mean, Toni Morrison always talked about this and stuff, but she was like, when you write about bus stops, and writing about Mount Santa Rosa and all of this stuff and playing and the beach and it's a weird, like she's kind of helped me name what I was trying to do. Writing beyond the colonial gaze. Like we're more than our suffering, we're such a small place, but our people are so wildly resilient. We've been here for 4,000 years and we're still kicking, we're trying to, make a life here. And, and it goes from everything, like even the North Korea nuclear test, right? Like there's so many ways that so many of these pieces, I mean, and you caught that, right? One of the China's ballistic missiles, they even nicknamed Guam Killer. So we're living in that context, right? Where it's like a possibility of oblivion is like looming around every, corner here. And it's like knowing all of that, but writing in a way that's not about that and not for that audience. It's just so important. I mean, they can read it. And just so you know, a lot of older people called me and scolding me. They're like, hey, stop saying this is a book for young people. I love the book too. Like I remember my friend Kristen, who runs Greenpeace International. She's like, why do you keep saying it's for young people? Seriously, a lot of old people love this book. And I was like, oh, well, but I guess it's primarily for them. And I think the piece, Tommy, honestly, that it came home so clearly in my mind was the Sherman Alexie, Look Me Dead in the Eye Once. At the very end, when I say I'm 19 and not sure, and my words are not there when I reach for them. And I was like, that moment, that's precisely what I mean when I say it's for young people. Young people are reaching for, the language that they need to set themselves free, or, and their loved ones free, and they don't have it. They don't have the access to it. So I think this book is about that. It's about that moment right there.
While we're on the subject of Spokane and Sherman Alexie, because we're in Spokane right now at Auntie's bookstore. Talk about what Spokane means to you, why you felt like you wanted to include that chapter and even the footnote that sort of gives us the vulnerability of you questioning the inclusion of Sherman Alexie as a figure who inspired you, given that all that we know now, there's a lot of layers to all of that.
Yeah, there is, I don't know what to say other than, there totally is. And I think it's the choice. For me, it was important to, not forsake, the bigger confusion for the smaller certainty. Like it's very easy to be like, compartmentalize everything, but it would be a lie to say that Sherman Alexie's literature, that Reservation Blues didn't really sort of like give me so much of what I needed at the time, and I'm honoring that particular moment, but also the footnote, like I couldn't have published it. And thank God I had such great editors, too, who were like, they really tease it out, massage it, elaborate, give it everything that you need to give it in the footnote. So some of my footnotes are crazy, like this footnote is kind of crazy because I'm having this interior, conversation with myself and trying to hold up what I believe up to the light, and scrutinize it and not be forgiving about it. So it was, I tried to capture the fullness of the tension that I felt, that I still feel, and so that's what I mean, that was part of what I was, God, this is, can I digress for a minute? So the other thought that when I was writing some of these footnotes, Tommy, I was thinking actually about something Joni Mitchell said about her album Blue when it came out. And she was like, because people were saying, wow, this record is so special because it doesn't have a dishonest note in it. And she was like, when I was writing these songs and like producing this record, I felt like a piece of cellophane, wrapped around a pack of cigarettes. It was just like 100% transparency. And I was like, shit, I wonder what this will look like in a book. I wonder if I could do this. I wonder if I could use footnotes in a way that accomplishes the same sort of like tender out on a limb that's shaking, like just like walking out on the furthest portion of that limb and realizing that the ground is not steady, and also like honoring that moment in life too. That tensions. And so the book tries to do that in a few places because it's complex. Language is complex, but all of those reasons, I mean, in the end, I decided to include the piece because it was primarily about me, clearly. And it really wasn't about him at all.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think it's like that for us sometimes. We realize we're almost other people become a vehicle, but it's really like really a mirror in the end.
Yeah. I want to get further into the footnote, but I want you to first just speak a little bit to what Spokane means to you.
Oh, yeah.
Because you went to college there.
That's right.
And I'd love to hear about your connection to Spokane. And
yeah,
even how you ended up going there from.
True. Okay, so I'll just totally keep it real and tell you the truth. I have absolutely no idea how in the world I ended up going there. So I went to Simon Sanchez High School. It's, a typical public high school here in some ways. Good, bad, but one of the things we are is like under-resourced, in so many different ways. And so we just had these really few and far between kind of like admissions counselors from just a handful of schools who would come and give a presentation. So one of the women from Gonzaga came and she gave a presentation, which of course I missed, right? Because I totally forgot, I flaked out and I forgot about it. Then I literally bumped into her in the hallway and I had like, again, my big bag and I remember like dropping it. I was just like falling apart in high school, So I remember bumping into this lady from Gonzaga and like we both fell down. And so we got up and we introduced each other and she was like, oh, you missed the thing you were coming to. I was like, yeah, I'm sorry. And she was like, here's my number, here's my card, here's this brochure or whatever. So I ended up applying and it was the only school that gave me money, and I didn't have any of that then. So it's not romantic. It's not any of that. It's practical. Like I didn't have any money and I needed a scholarship and, Gonzaga gave me one and I was just so grateful for it. And enough so that I could attend and not, be so, burdened by, financial hardship. Yeah. So I went, and then of course I met so many amazing people, some of whom actually are the people who helped hook us up. My friend Sarah Pryor helped us by introducing me to your friend Brendan, the writer as well. Yeah, so it's just that. But honestly, Spokane to me, it's like a blur. Like when I look back, there's so many good things about it, so many bad, but what is not a blur? The experiences that really make me feel so connected to that community is spending so much time with Native American communities. I actually spent I was literally not in class half the time. I was on different reservations. One of my best friends, she's like a second mother to me. I actually mentioned her in one of the footnotes too, actually. Cecilia Shoeships. I rode my first horse. I did my first sweat. She taught me so much about salmon people and and all kinds of things, and I feel like I learned more from her than I did from the universities. At the risk of being controversial, but you always learn more from people, from other human beings. And her life is like a story, and it's like 1,001 nights, it's just like the stories keep unspooling, more and more stories. And she's been like that kind of person in my life for all these years, and so, yeah, so Spokane means so much to me, but particularly the Native communities that I met and that we did so much, work with over the years. Yeah.
I couldn't help but remember the part in the book with the big backpack playing a kind of a prominent role. And then thinking back to the Ninja Turtles, and I'm wondering how sort of a Ninja Turtle image that
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
up.
yeah. Yeah, honestly, that was my editor too, Victoria. She runs the University of Guam Press, and she's the way, you need to give them more. Like, you need to really, like, which turtle were you? Because originally the first draft, I didn't even have that. She was like, no, specify that, because it's all about the particular. She totally caught it as an editor. She knew what I needed to do, and she helped me get there,
So working with an editor and doing something that's pretty unconventional, those two things don't always go well
Yeah.
together. And so can you talk about like this book is filled with so many different forms. You have speeches and you have poetry type things, and you have memoir type things, and you have essay type things with footnotes throughout, which I loved. Um, can you talk about the forming of all these forms into the one book, and just the process of going through thinking through putting those forms together, because there's not a lot of precedence, and you obviously have a lot of literary influence that you are grateful for and you talk about in the book, but there's not a lot of precedence, and this is when you're challenging form and recreating new form and you don't have precedence, it's kind of a scary place to be in creating it, especially for your first book. So just if you could talk about that a little bit.
Oh yeah, no, it's terrifying in a way, because the book doesn't, when you write a book like this and you're assembling it, you don't really know if anyone outside of your head will understand it, if the people outside, and it's a little bit crazy in that way. But then I was so blessed, though. I just have some really good friends, basically one of my best friends in the world. Do you remember that conversation that appears at the end of the book? The one with Desert? Yeah. That's my girl. I mean, my ride or die. And so she was like, okay, let's do this. She was like, let's just see if we can just collect, other things too. Because I told her I was writing because I could, I just had to write. And I was showing her some of the stuff that I had. She was like, wow, you have some older stuff that maybe you could try to make a collage of it, So she's really one of the first editor I had to really help me just as a friend to know and she she taught at Guam Community College. So she actually taught several of these pieces, or a few of them that are the older ones. She taught them in her course with all this sort of the demographic that I was trying to reach anyway. So she taught them, she understands what is reaching young people. And then she had some good friends. I sort of just girlfriends, and then more girlfriends were getting together. And there was Terry Perez, and there were some others. And they helped me sort of figure out, oh, this is kind of good. And then we submitted to our other friend, Victoria, who runs the University of Guam Press. And she was like, she saw a book too. And luckily we've been friends for years, all of us, the whole process was just friends, doing each other a solid kind of. And they just wanted this book to have a life, and she understood it, and she was super supportive. And then, and she's done such a good job of reviving the one and only local press we have here. It's long dormant. I think it's been dormant for 3 decades or something. We don't, and so she's done, I mean, that's a lot of work. And so we kind of just we gambled on each other, we're let's just do the absolute best job that we can do. And then so she kind of did, and I just happened to have kind of different things. And honestly, some of the pieces, I didn't really know they would ever have a life anywhere, because they weren't for anything, I didn't write them for anything. And it's odd. Some of the pieces were born from a scrap note that I had in a box from working for Mother Teresa when I was young. I have no idea what the hell am I ever going to do with this, it's not, part of my daily life anymore. But I took that experience and I turned it into just I get a little piece, right? But that, just examining that and thinking about experiences, and you can only convey certain messages in certain ways. I'll give you one example, Tommy. I'll just give you one really specific one. I wanted to end the book with Gausali. That became pretty clear. A really, really short, I think only a page long poem about the flower. Because I remember Judy Wampat, when she tried to introduce this bill to change Guam's official flower from an invasive species to a beautiful native flower. And she was mocked. I mean, so bad. She was dragged on social media, just dragged everywhere which way. Local media stations. It was just terrible to watch. And it was such a innocuous little thing. It was just such a small gesture, some symbolic thing. And I was like, wow, sometimes we don't even get gestures. We don't even get symbols. We can't even get this little thing, and it was so delicate. And honestly, I think poetry is my weakest form, like in my mind. Like, I don't know, like I never, because, I didn't study and, I go to school for any of it. So I was like, I feel probably least comfortable with it. But I kept doing it when I was writing this book. And I was like, I want to end on this because it's vulnerable, but because it sort of honors the small, the beautiful, the tender, like this, like really rare flower. And I wanted to end it that way. But yeah, that was an example of something that just had to go in, even if it, all the pieces were sort of like that.
Mm-hmm. When we talked recently, you have talked about kind of moving more fully into a role as a writer, which makes me super excited that we could get another book from you, and that we get your voice, and you're willing to share that. But can you just tell us a little bit about, for people that don't know, you've been doing this other kind of work for a long time, like you mentioned, sewing on behalf of creatures. But there's more to it than that, I'm sure, and you've been doing it for a while. Can you just talk about the work that you do that's not the writing, that probably informed the writing in a big way too?
Yeah, sure. So I sort of, I'm a human rights lawyer by day, I guess writer by night. But I basically, full-time job is I founded Blue Ocean Law. And then over time, I've been lucky enough to meet really like other amazing lawyers, like activist lawyer, like who are also artists. Like everyone on my team, they're also writers or artists. Or so like Julie Hunter is one of my longest associates, right? And she's also a writer. And so we care about the law, but we see so clearly its limitations. So we all do it. We all practice law, and we try to do really meaningful cases and work. We've been fighting, we work on the human right of self-determination. So we have been working on behalf of my own people, the indigenous Chamorro people. We have been in federal court. We had to litigate that Davis versus Guam case, which was just awful, in the end, the outcome having lost, but it's freed us up to do all this international advocacy. We recently we filed a communication on behalf of a community activist group, and we actually secured a historic decision recently. 3 different UN special rapporteurs found our allegations substantiated enough, and they filed a joint allegation letter against the US, saying that the military has violated a whole host of human rights here. Which is a major thing. And we've been, fighting environmental contamination. We do work throughout the region too. Like we work on behalf of, we've helped the people in French Polynesia, the indigenous people there, understand their sort of arguments vis-a-vis France with regard to what the French government is doing over there, and also the people West Papua. There's different things that we've done. We really have tried to protect indigenous communities in Papua New Guinea and Fiji, ward off this new extractive industry called deep sea mining. Basically, multinational corporations and companies are scrambling to mine the minerals on the ocean floor. It's like they call it the new global gold rush, honestly. But Pacific Islanders, our communities along the coast, those of us who live in closest proximity to these mining sites, and most of them are located in the Pacific. We're fighting, against this huge thing, which threatens to dispossess us. And so it's just, we've been doing a ton of work as a firm, and that's mostly what I do. And most recently, I was saying, back to the butterfly, I have that piece in the book called No Country for Ace-Ball Butterflies, but I always knew that I wanted to also do something on the lawyer side of my life. So we did it. And the reason why, when you really think about the butterfly, it's not just because it's beautiful, because it has so much willpower. It has so much will to live. A butterfly has to die like 6 times to live. Like it had. Honestly, I did so much research about butterflies, which is probably another reason why I really, really love Ocean Vuong's work so much. Like he was even talking about the monarch butterflies, and I was even realizing in my research, I found out that our butterfly here, the endemic one, she has to fight even more harder to live. She has, like, monarchs go through 5 instars, ours go through 6. So she's just fighting her whole life to live, and I was like, holy shit, if that's not a metaphor, I don't know what is. Like we are trying so hard to live here, and we had to fight so hard, and I don't know, and the fact that she's so beautiful, and and I was like, this is what the book is about. It's about radical listening to the lives that are more vulnerable than ours.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about, so I came to writing pretty late, relatively late for what most people experience, and reading also. Can you talk about your sort of origin story as a writer? Because I think everyone kind of has one to some extent. I'd love to hear the beginnings of writing and when it became important to you.
Yeah, for me, honestly, I think it's hard to answer, only because I don't know if there's like a precise moment or one book, but a few that come to mind, is Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose. It was also a collection of these essays, and I was like reading it, I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. I mean, I didn't know necessarily if it was like me becoming a writer myself, but just giving other people the language that they need to communicate the ideas in their head, or what we help people bear witness. Sometimes we're just trying to, make sense of what we're living through, and like when I read that collection, I was like, wow, this is like a veil had lifted, like I had so much clarity. It was pretty mind-blowing. I mean, I've told her that since, luckily, I can't believe that she even wrote a blurb with the book. It's still all very mind-blowing, but I mean, I told her, like, of course, because I'm a crier, I guess. So like I cried talking to her, but it was just funny because I was like, you have no idea like what this means to me, like it recalibrates your thinking. It makes you writers shorten the distance, right, between words and people. They bring people to the words that they need sometimes. And I was like, that is what I want to do. Mm-hmm. I want to, bridge that gap. Yeah.
So speaking of Alice Walker and then Alice Walker blurb on the front, you talked about, it's part of the story of this book coming to being had to do with word of mouth and knowing friends and people, believing in it. But you told me the other day that, for being such a small publisher, it has spread pretty widely and has had to go beyond the means that the press has. Can you talk about the story of the book getting out there and just like a word of mouth sort of style?
Yeah, Tommy, but that's the wildest part, like it's all still, I think every week. And yeah, again, the publisher is a longtime friend, Victoria, she runs the press and we check in like weekly, and it's always exciting because we're such an unknown factor. Like, it's like a small press, but it's like a small but mighty press in some ways, and and it's just the strength of our just relationships with people. Like I don't, she's very good friends with Julio Diaz and sent him the book, and he responded to it like right away, kind of effortlessly. He just loved it, and Alice was the same. I had known her through, actually I met Alice because I was trying to ask her through a mutual friend to write a blurb for another friend's book. So this was way before I ever was going to write anything. But she's a Marshallese poet. Her name is Kathy Jetnell Kitchener. I write about her in the book. You should totally check her out. She's awesome. But I was trying to get her to write a blurb for her book. So and then we just stayed in touch, and then I gave away copies of her book once. And so like I had to contact her for that. But yeah, so the story with the press is all of it's been like very homegrown. I mean, it's like all and I think it's just attention to detail. I think it's just great love. I think that's all it is. Like like the publisher put so much love into it, and so like we printed the books, and we of course don't know exactly how many are going to sell. So I don't know how many exactly, but she's printed. We've done more than a few. We've done a few runs already, basically. Because people are reading the book, which is really exciting. And it's just been like that, the experience. I mean, even connecting with you, where it's just through a mutual friend, like the generosity of other people. Like we don't have, it's not like I have an agent or we're going through these like formal channels for anything. It's all just, I don't know, relationships and a good deal of luck, and the generosity of other writers like yourself, and other people. I think that is why the book is done well, and we're all. I mean, I know I can speak for her when I say she's so stoked too. That people are responding to it.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna go to Q&A in a sec. But I'm this is, for where it's at in the press, in the printing stage. This is obviously not ideal, but I wrote you a blurb. I was just gonna read it to you because then
Okay.
So this is the blurb that will eventually get on whatever printing it can get on. I don't know how it works once the book is out, but the shortest big book I've ever read, powerful with love and tender about what it needs to be tender about, but direct, even fierce, where it means to tell us what we need to be thinking about, what this country has been doing, continues to do to this world, to Aguon's people, and to indigenous people everywhere, to the land, and to all its beings. What he is saying, writing, at times feels unsayable, yet with courage and humility, yes, but most of all with beauty, with voice, light and heavy as the dying 8-spot butterfly he writes about, strong and luminous as a needed beacon in a fog of disinformation and dismay. Julian Aguon, with his small book, emerges already a giant. So I think that's what it'll be when we can get it to some kind of, like I said, I don't know how late blurbs help, but I hope it can. And thank you for writing it. It's incredible.
Honestly, Tommy, thank you so much. That's such a beautiful blurb. And can I just, right before we go to Q&A, can I just tell you something? I'm just right now I'm thinking about your last sentence of there. I hope not to butcher this, but you're talking about somewhere, in there inside him, where he is, where he's always been. Even now it is morning and the birds are singing. It's something like that. It's so beautiful.
That is it. Thank you.
It's so beautiful. And honestly, I kept thinking about that too, because the bird song was this sort of ever-present idea in the book, in my book too, and just the fact its absence, and the hope that we have that they will come home. And I don't know, it's just coming from you, it just means a lot. So thanks so much.
Yeah, it's, with this kind of belief that I have in the book, it's effortless, and I just want to do it. So, and I know that other people feel that way too. So it's just testament to the power of the book and you as a writer. So I would just thank you for including me on whatever this weird, book journey that you're doing. I hope that it gets a little bit more backed officially in ways that will get it wider spread, because people need to be reading this book and what your next thing is, which I think there's a question in the Q&A about what's next. But I believe Claire's going to come on and ask questions.
Thanks. We've got time for questions. So you can drop your questions into the Q&A box. This first one is from Thomas. Given the name and the content in your book related to the properties of perpetual light, what is your relationship with religion, Catholicism, and the islands? Is your spiritual practice in your advocacy different from it?
Well, that's a great question. Complicated for sure. I mean, I feel very Catholic in some ways only because I'm surrounded by my community, almost all of whom are Catholic. Not all, but just a vast majority, But actually, that's not when I feel closer to God. Not in any of those scenarios. Not in church. Not in any of that. I feel closest to God, or whatever you want to call it, when I'm, like lying on my back on the earth itself, or just being close to the earth, or being in the water. Honestly, in the ocean, I feel complete, I don't know, supreme peace, I guess you could say. That's when I feel closest to whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so where I live now, I mean, I'm very lucky that we finally moved to this area that we moved to. And there's so much life here because we live in a sort of jungly, in the village that we're in, is very jungly. We don't even get like cell phone reception here, but there's so many animals. I mean, there's so many butterflies here. There's so many like monitor lizards and deer and grasshoppers. I mean, just everything, and that's God to me.
Someone else is wondering how you practice quiet / reach for the quiet to offer non-adversarial communication style in your writing.
I guess it sort of relates to the last answer. When you're just in a place, that's peaceful like this, it really helps. I mean, just being away, just being away from just all kinds of noise, it really helps.
This question is from Tina. Tina says, could you talk a bit more about audience, specifically writing for Guamanians, but also knowing you would write for audiences elsewhere? Could you also talk about writing for Indigenous audiences, but also non-Indigenous audiences? And Tommy, if you want to chime in on this one too.
Should I go first, or you?
Either way.
Okay. Okay.
I mean,
go ahead.
For there, I was the first half of writing it. I was writing. The only person that I was reading it to was my wife, and I was not. There was no audience in mind. I think about the reader in terms of like its readability. Like if somebody's trying to play a song right, its listenability is part of like the musician's craft, and so its readability and how fine-tuned you can make your sentences has to do with, that's just a part of craft. And for me, I think about the reader and the reading experience, because writing and reading is it's part of the same communion experience that we have. It's dependent on each other. And then I got into IAIA, Institute of American Indian Arts, and I had peers, Native peers and mentors. And it was definitely, just in a very real way, thinking about the workshop that was going to be reading the book that I was working on, the thesis that I was finishing. But I think most of all, I didn't at that time think about it. It's been weird to have success with there and be thinking about the next book and there being a very real audience, whether it's a good or bad book. People are equally going to want to read it to find out whether it's a flop or if it's any good. There's going to be a curiosity enough that there's going to be readers and that's Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And I think I still, to remain grounded in the work and in the process, even though I abstractly know that exists, and I sold a book to a publisher, I still try to think about the page and the readability and the reader and that experience of reading and what will that be like. So I've tried not to let that part affect me. Go ahead, Julian.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's, I think it can be its own kind of like death sentence, or at the very least a prison, to be too preoccupied with the audience, because then it becomes about, I don't know, capitalism. It becomes about consumer choices, what like brand of deodorant it cheapens the thing for me. So I don't really write primarily with the audience. I intuitively feel clear as I'm going about like who this might move or who this might empower or, get who this might help even, but I don't really set out with the writer and with the readership in mind. And I think that keeps it, I think that's a little bit better. But also like you, I also have a partner who's so supportive here. And so like he knows about everything I'm doing. He's, doing all the sort of daily life things that even makes, my writing possible. And so like we process ideas together and I'll, read something to him. He likes being read to as opposed to reading it. So, but I know he's so, he's developed an ear for listening to my stories and helping me find, what's in them.
This next question is maybe a little bit related to the last one. Mariana is wondering if Julian has any advice for young Chamorros who have all this rage at the injustice our people have faced. How can we be productive with it instead of consumed by it?
I totally appreciate the question, Mariana. I 100% support you. I mean, and all of you who are on the call who are young Chamorro writers to do it. One of the first things maybe I would suggest possibly is joining one of UOG Press's writing groups. They have them now. They're just attracting more and more writers to work it. And sometimes it's nice to write and then share it with the group and sort of, but I think that first step is the most important thing. Otherwise your rage can just, it just swallow you whole, you need art is so useful too for the artist, so it doesn't, what we have in us, it does, it needs an outlet. And so especially with what we have happening here, it's too easy to be so completely pulverized by the violence around in this community, what's happening to us. And I'm here, to the extent that that's helpful to you. And this community has really supportive artists. So we are all here for you.
And I think this will be our final question for tonight. Maya's curious what projects you're working on. Can you talk about your journey recognizing your potential as a writer? Did you ever experience imposter syndrome along the way? And how did you balance your writing with your other interests, activism, speaking events, etc.?
These questions for me? Sorry, can you repeat it? For some reason, I thought that question was for Tommy. I don't know.
Maya's curious what projects you're working on, and if you can talk about your journey in recognizing your potential as a writer, and if you ever experienced imposter syndrome and how you balanced it with your other interests, particularly your activism.
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm just working to, try to promote this book, and I haven't started a next one yet, but that said, I am working on an essay, a long polemic, trying to write a very tender polemic about climate change that I don't feel has been written yet. Not the kind of essay that I really am thinking about. I haven't read it yet. And I really want to get that done and give it to my friend Lenica at the Atlantic if she'll have it.
Oh, you know what? This question's really good. So let's do one more just popped up. This one's from Terry. Julian, one of the things we talked about when we were looking at the early drafts was how I wanted to know more, but I didn't know if more was what was needed. And you, as a storyteller, needed to make that decision. How have you settled into the role of storyteller, Indigenous or not? How do you define this role? Because that is what you are and maybe what you have always been.
Yeah, that seems like a statement. I guess if it's a question, hi, Terry. Tommy, this is Terry. She's one of the awesome Chamorro women who helped me with Des and the others. I guess for me, I felt like that in some ways, like the book, I feel like I said enough, even if it was a short book, I think there's on a superficial level, in some ways, you can look at a book this short and think it doesn't have enough. Right. I think it's a natural inclination to think it needs to be longer, and for me, honestly, like some of the pieces are so short. I mean, they're kind of ridiculously short. They're a page long or 2 pages, but I felt like they all had something, I just don't want to add. I just don't want to decorate the shit out of it. Just keep putting shit on it, how we do sometimes to our writing where something's good right away and then we fuck it up by just putting all kinds of trinkets, and bedazzling it. And so some of the pieces were so short and so simple, but they felt true. I don't know how to describe it, but once I feel like a sentence, is true, then I don't need to really touch it,
All right, well, I think we will leave it there for tonight. Thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. And thank you so much, Julian and Tommy. It was a real pleasure. I hope to see you in person someday soon. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tommy.